Please welcome the Executive Director of S&P Global Mobility Consulting, Michael Robinet. Executive Analyst at Cox Automotive, Michelle Krebs. Principal and Chief Executive Officer of Anderson Economic Group, Patrick L. Anderson. And to moderate the discussion, please welcome host of JR Morning, Guy Gordon.
All right, Michelle. Good afternoon. We're delighted to be the anchor leg of the relay here. And let's get started with it. We were told at the beginning of this cycle for this labor contract that it was an unprecedented time, this dramatic transformation in the industry once in a century. It was an unprecedented strategy that the UAW used. At the end, the word unprecedented got overworked to a degree that I think we've ever seen before. The question now is, were there new precedents? And what are they? And where is the industry, both financially and from a product standpoint, going forward? So we hope we can answer all those questions for you. I want to start with my good friend Patrick Anderson, who during the strike was kind of giving us the tale of the tape. Like this heavyweight bout, who had the reach, who was landing the punches. In the final analysis, how were your forecasts? And when you look at the losses that are being reported by the big three, are they synced up?
The strike turned out to be, and this is not news to anyone in this room, extraordinarily expensive. Starting with UAW members.
So you're saying it was unprecedented?
It was, yeah. By comparison, the Anderson Economic Group estimates of the 2019 strike were a little over $4 billion in losses, a lot of which were wage losses, but also suppliers. This is $10.4 billion through 6 weeks. We estimated that the Detroit 3 manufacturers alone lost $4 billion, but suppliers, many of whom are here, lost almost as much. And workers, I mean, UAW workers, $650 million through week 6, but also
lots of other suppliers
workers
that are here. Did you feel like that the media got it? Did they tell your story very well?
No.
Okay.
Well, I was trying.
We tried. I mean, I can tell you, like, we tried to get it back to that. And so did Patrick.
So, I mean, it's extremely expensive, and you can see it now. You can see it in income tax decline. You can see in retail sales decline in Michigan. And at least if I look at the announcements thus far by GM and Ford and some interpretation of Chrysler, they've already acknowledged about $3.5 billion in losses. And I think by the end of the year, when we see 10Ks, it'll probably be larger.
Okay, but they seem to be saying, especially when they're talking to analysts, and maybe this depends on the audience, right? They're saying, well, we can mitigate this. We can recoup the lost production. We can adjust it. I think Mary Barra said we've already eliminated $500 million in costs and yielded savings in this quarter. We're going to duplicate that in the next. So they've already erased the $1 billion in losses, or at least have mitigated it. First of all, if that's the case, to some degree, when Sean Fain said, well, they've got it and we can get it, and that this isn't an existential threat, was Sean Fain proven right by some of the comments that came out of the big three post-strike?
Well, and by the way, good afternoon. I would say the contracts are 4.5-year contracts, so I mean it's gonna be spread out over those 4.5 years. When the OEMs say we're going to be able to make it up, they only have so many levers that they can pull. We were talking backstage about what can they improve productivity. I think you saw from the earlier presentations, productivity is already pretty high. So it's not like, oh, well, we can put our tires on differently. Most of that easy low-hanging fruit has already been picked.
So are you calling BS on that?
No, I'm saying that you can delay capital.
I was just using some of Sean Fain's vernacular. Sorry.
You can delay capital, but a lot of the content in the vehicle is purchased from the supply base, and so a lot of that is code for we're going to go back to the suppliers and help and ask for them to help fund some of that. But that's going to be very, very difficult in the current environment.
And so, long term, looking just beyond the immediate post-strike environment, maybe it wasn't an existential threat to the big three, even though we heard from Jim Farley and others during the. And we're all going to say a lot of things during the heat of battle. But is it an existential threat for some of the suppliers in this room, and especially as you go down the food chain?
I think there's no doubt. If you've got an OEM and they pay now 15% this year and another, let's say, 5% the next couple of years, and you're a supplier next door, you're going to have to raise your wages the same level, or at least very close to the same level. So, and therefore, to stay in business, you're going to have to charge more for your product. It's not rocket science. So that's essentially, this is going to find its way through the ecosystem all the way through. Absolutely.
So this is the only strike, I think, in any memory, unprecedented, to use the word, Michelle, where we heard from the UAW that they didn't really, it was a stated goal that they were going to damage the brand. That's kind of a scorched earth strategy that we haven't seen before, that you really don't care where the chips fall or how you're going to pick them up afterwards. How much were the brands damaged? Do we have a sense of that in the research that you've seen? And to Michael's point, it's trickled down. It's going to come down to the consumer.
Well, a couple thoughts. So they are not going to be able to make it all up, certainly in raising the prices of vehicles.
Because the consumers are very
well, because we expect to see a rather flat market in the next year or two. So they aren't going to make it up on volume. And we think that affordability of vehicles is going to be a huge limitation in terms of higher sales. It's already a big issue. We think that about 10% of people that normally would buy new cars have dropped out of the market already because they can't afford vehicles. So I don't know where they make it up, because it's certainly not going to be in slapping on much higher prices. And in fact, we've seen, incentives increase. All those big prices that happened during the chip shortage, those are gone.
So does the affordability equation change whether we're talking about EVs or conventional ICE vehicles?
Well, EVs are more expensive, so that certainly doesn't help the equation at all.
But we have to be careful, and I think John and Joe talked a little bit about this earlier. We've BEV'd on the edges. We've BEV'd, and I use that as a verb. You can steal that, I don't care. But we've done full-size pickup trucks, we've done luxury products, and we've done performance vehicles. Mom and Pa Smith in Greenville, Michigan, that drive an Equinox, we don't have a BEV for them right now. We really don't, not in high volume. The industry is going to start building what we'll call mid-market products. And to Michelle's point, we could say, well, BEVs are expensive. Well, the ones that are on the market are expensive because those are the ones that people have demanded. But we're going to start to BEV in the middle. That's where the real tell of the tape is going to come, is the pricing of those vehicles versus their ICE equivalents or hybrid equivalents, and how all that is going to work its way through.
Right.
And none of this is happening in a vacuum. We've got higher than normal interest rates. There is this idea that we could have a soft landing. The market has been betting that is becoming more apparent and maybe more likely. Patrick, where do you see that happening in terms of reaching that 2% goal? And how will that influence the consumer environment?
I remember, Guy, when I got started here as a bank economist for Dave Littman, who taught me a substantial fraction of what I know about the auto industry. And one of the things that I learned way back then was number of weeks it takes you to buy the car. Whether it's an EV, a new car, used car, that matters. And if inflation's taking that away from you, and if inflation's raising the price, or if it's expensive to have a vehicle, you're likely to not buy a vehicle. And I do think that the auto industry is, to Michelle's point, and to yours as well, some of this production is not being made up. Some of it went to other automakers. And some of it went to people that said, okay, I'm walking away, I'm buying a used car, just keeping my old jalopy running. And we're at risk here. If we raise prices any more than they are, they're already extraordinarily high. I mean,
so if the costs are $500 per car, as I think we heard from Murray Barra in the past week, $575 cost increase at the end of the contract. They believe they can mitigate a lot of that with some cost savings. But is there room to pass it along to the consumer? And if so, again, getting back to Sean Fain, was the hyperbole overblown that this is an existential threat? It's a couple $100 on a car that's already, you're paying $50,000 for.
When you talk about adding $900 a car, which I think is a more realistic estimate, and particularly when you're talking about suppliers, you're talking about another couple weeks of work for somebody. and just to get basically the same car. We're not talking about any quality improvements for this, it's just increasing the cost. And I think it affects whether people buy it, and I think we, as an industry, one of the consequences of the strike and the contracts will be, we will forego some production, some investments, some of which are already apparent, and some products will be priced out of the market, and we won't make them.
So this was a unique strategy on the part of the UAW, and I was giving you the frog in the pot scenario when we were backstage, and that instead of throwing one frog in a very hot pot and then expecting everybody else to follow it, all frogs were in, they turned the heat up slowly. There may be a fairness equation to that, but in the end, in terms of lost production and cost to the industry, did that make a difference? Was it just as disruptive and damaging to the industry, or did it turn out maybe a little bit better if they say they can recoup a lot of these production losses?
Well, like we were saying earlier, there's some plants that.
Or is the jury out? I mean,
I don't know if the jury's out. I mean, it's pretty cut and dried what was struck and what the inventory was and what kind of plants. But I think towards the end where KTP, Kentucky Truck Plant, went down. I mean, I can't think of a more profitable plant, literally almost in the entire world. And Ford people may not agree with me, but it's very, very important facility. And when you lose the slot to build a vehicle at that facility, you will never make it up because they build 120 hours a week. And you can't, the good Lord has not given us more hours in the week. So that's right. It. Once you lose the ability, you can't build that vehicle. So, I mean, that puts a lot of pressure on vehicle manufacturers. I think, when Arlington was taken down, there was another, that was, that to me was the one that basically said, hey, we mean business. And I, for good or for bad, there was a resolution pretty quickly afterwards.
So we really won't know what the long-range effect of this is until it trickles down to the suppliers.
To the suppliers and the consumers. I mean, so like Michelle said, the suppliers are going to have to pay more to pay their people. Literally 65% of the manufactured cost of the vehicle comes from the supply base, at least in the ICE world. In the BEV world, it'll probably go down, but nonetheless, it's still very important. And when that trickles down, that is going to raise prices, and consumers are going to have to make up that difference.
Circling back, Michelle, I don't know if we got to it, but in terms of this idea that the UAW had a stated goal of damaging the brand, is there damage out there? And even most consumers aren't going to hear Mary Barra say that, well, we can mitigate these costs. They're just going to believe that this is costing them a lot more, the average consumer.
Oh, if you were in the market in 2019 and are in the market now, it's big shock. So I think we are living in a little microcosm here, and we focus on this a lot. You look across the country, and yes, they knew about the strike, but I don't think that they thought, well, I'm not going to buy GMs. We saw sales continue. We did not see any slowdown in sales. We were actually quite surprised at how well sales held up. Now, here's the other thing, though. Inventories were up. And we are seeing a lot of buildup in inventory, which is going to mean that auto manufacturers are going to also have to do incentives. We are anticipating a normal year where production increases, inventory builds up, and incentives will have to be used, which is another cost to the automakers.
Yeah.
Patrick, during the ramp up to this, there was a lot of concern on the part of the big three that there was already a huge labor cost disadvantage against the transplants and against Tesla. I think in some cases it was up to 40%. Where are we in that now? Because we have seen, it didn't take long for Toyota, Honda, Hyundai, all of them to say, we're going to maybe not match that first year increase, but we're going to come close. So in the final analysis, is that labor cost disadvantage wider or about the same because it lifted all boats to some degree?
We were concerned about this, and the Detroit-based automakers were at a competitive disadvantage in terms of cost with other US-based manufacturers. I'm not talking about building in Korea or China. I'm talking about building in the United States. Many times I have to remind people that Toyota builds here, Honda builds here, Hyundai builds here, Mercedes builds here, BMW builds here, and Tesla builds here too. And I haven't exhausted everything. And hopefully our suppliers are also selling to them. And there was a cost disadvantage. There was also a product. I mean, the Detroit automakers focused on products that were more effective, that they were good at. You mentioned a couple of them, like the trucks and the SUVs, of which the market leaders are, General Motors and Ford and Chrysler. There's good products out there from other makers, but these are the market leaders. Unfortunately, what we see here is we took a hit to our brand. I mean, that was painful. I thought it was unnecessary to call the automakers and the industry the enemy. I think that hurts everyone in the room. But the prices went up, which we said right at the beginning. Of course, wages are going to go up. They have to go up. And it didn't take the other automakers a week or 2 weeks to say, okay, we'll raise our rates. In fact, I think Hyundai's first year wages is actually higher increase than what's in the UAW. So our cost disadvantage did not go away. One of the things that I think is bad about this strike is, there were very damaging things that were said in the industry. That rhetoric, that discussion of the automakers as the enemy was not constructive. And meanwhile, we have competitors out there, and they're in a competitive market. They're raising the wages as they should, and we still have a cost disadvantage.
Bottom line, Michael, was it an effective strategy on the part of the UAW, this stand-up strategy? And they're going to try it again, 2.0, at the transplants.
If you're an employee, you certainly feel it worked, but I will say something that, let's say you're one of the D3 and you decide, I've got a new product, I want to build it. Why on earth would you consider building it in the United States when you're going to have to deal with this sort of animosity? Why wouldn't you look at Mexico or Canada or some other strategy? To me, I think what they've done is essentially, like you said, scorched earth. We're going to make sure that every one of our plants has a future. Here's the future legislated in the contract. And if we get more than that, great. But I think if you're the one of the Detroit three, you're thinking, I've got to really think about what I'm going to do in the United States going forward. And I hate to say that because it's a great place to build vehicles, but it has changed the dynamic, in my opinion.
So Stand Up 2.0, they're already going, I think they've already got some marketing plans out there, and they're targeting specific plants. I have seen quotes from analysts saying that there is no time better than this for the UAW to go after the transplants again, and that the likelihood of success has never been higher. That doesn't mean it isn't a pretty steep climb. So Michelle, you've watched this a lot.
I would say there is no better time than this, but I don't think that they'll probably be very successful. They're located in southern states.
That's one of the key things. Yeah. People don't talk about the culture of the regions of the country where these plants are located.
Yeah.
You would agree, Michael?
Oh, I would agree wholeheartedly. Absolutely.
So you still, low likelihood that the transplant effort, organizing effort?
I don't think the likelihood's any more today than it was a couple of years ago, especially given that the attitude and the adversarial relationship that has sort of emerged over the last 6 months.
Michelle, you follow the product mix very closely. How much has the strike maybe changed some of the product mix? In order to recoup those costs, are there going to be some changes?
Well, I think we don't know that yet, but I think that's certainly one of the ways that they'll address this and offset costs. I mean, I'm sure they're going to be looking at their product lines. And then we also know that, on the electric vehicle side, they're looking at, maybe we don't, well, GM has rolled back some of its launches, pushed them out. So I think there will be a reevaluation of a lot of the portfolios. Also figuring out, maybe they have to take some costs out in terms of what features are.
Well, and more curiously, I mean, we had this hint last week that they're going to perhaps add hybrids. I mean, after they stated that, they're going to be 50% EV, was it, by 2030. Now they're saying,
GM.
we
You're
might.
talking about General Motors.
General Motors. Now they're saying we're going to add hybrids back into the product mix, perhaps. How do you interpret that?
Well, I was at an event where Mary Barra spoke last night, and she wouldn't commit to it, but she said something interesting. She said, well, we've got the technology in China. We could just, bring it here. But
Have you read the room?
Well, yeah, and also it doesn't transfer that easily, I don't think. You don't just
Not too easily. But
I mean, not
you have to-
quickly,
You have to
certainly not
make sure
quickly.
that the supply base is equipped to build
Right,
that
right.
content here.
It just doesn't happen. You don't just overnight do that. So.
Mary Barr, I did say that, Patrick, that they are on target to make money, make money, so I'm going to do my air quotes thing, on EVs by their target date. But maybe there were some conditions there. How did you read that? And do you think that, are they whistling by the graveyard with there, or is that attainable?
One of the things we identified early as the wild card in this was EVs in the strike. I didn't know how aggressive UAW would be about organizing the battery plants. I actually thought it was embarrassing how low the wages were at some of the battery plants.
Right.
I would have rather worked at McDonald's than some of those factories.
And not to mention the fact that these people were told, particularly in Lordstown, that these jobs were replacing the Lordstown plant, and they were misled. Okay, and I'm not sure exactly who. There were politicians, there were companies in there, but that was part of the anger that fed the the pretty strong public support for the UAW strike, and I sensed that too. I mean, I was in agreement that they were misled, but if you read carefully, you don't actually have to read that carefully, but if your financial representative says that you might make single-digit EBIT after federal tax credits by 2025,
And interest, yeah.
that means you are almost certainly losing money through 2025. And I mean, I hate to be the blunt person, but when you're losing money and then you don't count financing costs, you don't count taxes, and you have a huge federal tax credit set, and you want to add all those in and still maybe you're single digit, that means you're losing money. That being said, I think it would actually be something of a victory for General Motors or Ford to break even on, even in optimistic accounting by 2025. I think the much more important issue is, can you produce products that people want, what you're saying. And can afford. And like you said, I mean, I've been driving a battery electric vehicle for 3 years. I bought in one of those segments that you said we BEV'd in.
Yeah.
Okay? That's not a mainstream segment.
Nope.
It's way too expensive. It's way too burdensome. And unless we make products that a large number of Americans voluntarily want to buy, we're in trouble as an industry.
How much is riding on the Equinox?
Oh, it's Equinox. It's going to be, a new quote-unquote Ford Edge. It's going to be a new Cherokee. I mean, it's not just Equinox. There's a whole nest of new products in that segment. But I think something's been lost here. BEVs and EVs are all about economies of scale. And right now we're not there yet. I think a lot of people miss that, this vehicle automatically is going to lose money right now. Well, I think it was always planned that it's going to take a while to get the economies of scale up. That's why all these new battery plants are coming in. And these launches are going to be lumpy. I don't care what anybody says. You get new propulsion system, new vehicle, new plant, sometimes new people, and new consumers. Dealers haven't really sold them. I mean, everything is new. Basically, to me, means it's going to be problematic. It's take a while to work its way through. I guess some people are not quite as patient as they need to be. So
well, and I think that when it's all started, it seemed like when all these announcements were being made, it almost, we were led to believe this is a real linear thing, and it never seemed like it would be that way. And now Mary Barra once again last night said it's going to be a bumpy ride.
Yeah.
Well, I think if we'd gone in,
well, it's always going to be a bumpy ride if it's something other than a consumer driving it.
yes.
Right? So there's a discussion going on in Washington right now about these EV tax credits, and also there's a debate going on whether or not there is an actual EV mandate. The Biden administration says there isn't. Is there an EV mandate? When you look at the tailpipes emissions instructions coming out of the EPA and elsewhere, and how do you satisfy a mandate if nobody told the consumer?
There's absolutely an EV mandate in the proposed rules from the EPA. There's no two ways around it. If you read it, which I did, I endured it. I didn't endure the whole 1,000, but I did read a solid 100, okay? And literally their target, I'm not making this up, their support for their target of over 50% was a collection of press releases that were assembled by an advocacy group. That was the EPA's scientific basis for saying we could be
Assessing
selling
demand.
60% or more. And and this is where our automakers, our suppliers, we're all in this. Like, we have this proposed rule mandating this, and then California's right behind, or as they would say, in front. As other states, where California's rule purports to outlaw the sale of any ICE vehicle. I mean, even fire trucks. I'm like, you know, who's going to put out the wildfires? I want to say in California. So we are actually absolutely facing it. I understand the difficulty the automakers are making, but back to the point, your point, you have to make a product that consumers voluntarily want to buy. And I think that's the big reckoning we've got the next few years.
Wall Street Journal this morning put up a forecast showing that the 50% is not only unattainable, it is by a factor of 3 off. That by that target date, the more likely market share penetration is going to be 15%. Where are we in that range?
I don't agree with that.
You think it'll be more than
Oh
that?
yeah, it'll be more than that. It may not be 50. It's certainly 50 is going to be very tough. 50 means that, you know, 50% of the vehicles sold in the market are going to be BEVs. Think about everything that's sold in the Midwest in rural economies, and it's going to be a mix. It's always going to be a mix, and 50 is going to be pretty tough, but 15 is way too low.
We're at about 8% now. So.
Yeah, I worry that anytime you have regulations or politics driving it, you're basically pushing the industry onto a trap door, and then saying we're just going to hope it doesn't open and that everybody else will follow. Are the consumers about ready to pull that lever and say, no, we're not going there yet? And what does that do to the communities that have invested? The Marshalls, the Big Rapids, the state of Michigan. We've ponied up SOAR fund money to support the BEV supply chain. If the return on that investment, if the dividends are both going to be delayed, deferred, or diminished, what kind of a bad taste is that going to leave? Have we also been, to some degree, not defrauded, but have we been harmed by that?
I actually, there was a day in May where there was editorials written in the Detroit News. One was written by me, one was written by Sean Fain. We didn't coordinate, okay? Both of us said the same thing. He was much more blunt. We are spending, as taxpayers, huge amounts of money to subsidize battery electric vehicles, and then we have low-paying jobs, as you said, embarrassingly low-paying jobs, and we're forcing people to buy it, and they're not profitable. That doesn't make sense. He then went on to what his agenda was, and I went to a somewhat different agenda about the whole industry, about Michigan, but absolutely, this is a serious issue of the country and Michigan investing in this and pushing consumers ahead of where they want to go. I want, my whole career I've been here in the center of the auto industry. I want it to continue to be the center of the auto industry. And I think one of the biggest risks we face isn't that we won't figure out how to make this stuff. We've been figuring out how to make this stuff for over a century. We had electric cars on Woodward 120 years ago. And
you go out
steamers.
To Fairlane Manor.
Yeah.
In Dearborn, Mrs. Ford drove an electric.
Yeah, right.
The plug is still there.
Right. 120 years we've been driving electric cars down Woodward. Okay, we know how to do this. We know how to do this as good as anybody. But if we put ourselves in the position where the government is forcing us to build something that consumers don't want, that does not work. And this is the reckoning that I feel we have.
But I think that consumers, and I think John said it earlier, is that consumers are warming up to that. We have seen that. I mean, EV sales rose 50% over the past year. They are warming up to them, and we are going to get more compelling vehicles. So it's just going to take longer than
which is getting those affordable vehicles out the door. But I had Jake Fisher from Consumer Reports on my show this morning. They tested the range, found out that the majority of vehicles didn't reach what was on the EPA sticker. I don't know.
High repair costs.
Shocked by that. Mm-hmm. But the other thing is, it is shocking. 79% more problems in a vehicle that supposedly is supposed to be simpler because it doesn't have as many moving parts.
Yeah.
Again, a lot of new technologies, and nobody said that it was going to be perfect right out of the gate. And I think one thing that's really important, and any of the D3 will tell you this. They are working like overtime on new technology in the battery space. Battery chemistries are going to change so quickly, it's going to be blinding. And they're going to get better, and they're going to get safer, and they're going to be able to recharge.
Less expensive.
Greater range, less recharge time. All of that is going to work its way through. I hate to say it, but those of us that know the automotive industry and look way beyond, the people are thinking way too short-sighted on this. I mean, we are changing the ecosystem that's been building for a century, and we're trying to do it in 6 years. It's really tough to do that, and in fact, almost impossible. But it's not a matter of if, but when.
All right, I just have a few seconds. Patrick, I wanted to ask you, in a normal consumer spending cycle that we're in here, we did just see a significant portion of our employees get a significant pay bump.
Yeah.
What kind of Christmas does that mean for a lot of area retailers and just families?
Michigan really suffered October, November. Retail sales are down, income tax collection down, as you'd expect when when you have a strike. And that I do think that the wage increases were coming. The wage increases will benefit a lot of the workers. The ratification bonuses disproportionately affect us in a positive way. So that's basically a transfer of money from shareholders across the country to a large number of people living here. So those will be positive. But I have all the concerns about next year that we talked about. And again, I'm an EV optimistic. I've been driving one for 3 years. But that long road, if the government mandates something impossible to happen, it doesn't happen. It's still impossible. Give it 10 years or 15 years. Yeah, we can be really successful.
All right. Merry Christmas, happy holidays early to all of you. Patrick, Michelle, Michael, thank you very much.
Thank you.